Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Stockbridge Library's third season of online poetry. In this third season, our focus is inquiry and the power of poetry in asking and answering questions. This series was started by John Gillespie, who in 2020 was the president of the Board of Trustees of the Stockbridge Library. He has since moved farther afield, but is still very dear to us, and we appreciate everything he does for the library, including mentoring this series. We are lucky to have with us today Julie Danho. Julie has read for us in this series before and has some very powerful poetry, some humorous, all deeply affecting. And a few words about Julie. Her first full-length collection of poems, Those Who Keep Arriving, won the 2018 Gerald Cable Book Award from Silverfish Review Press. Her chapbook, Six Portraits, received the 2013 Slappering Hall Press Chapbook Award, and her poems have appeared in various journals, including Pleiades, Alaska Quarterly Review, Blackbird, and the New Ohio Review. Julie has been featured on the Writer's Almanac, Poetry Daily, and Verse Daily. She's been awarded fellowships from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts and the McCall Johnson Fund. And Julie earned her MFA from Ohio State University and is joining us from Providence, Rhode Island today. Julie, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to turn the program over to you, Julie, and you, John.
Right. No, thank you, Wendy, as usual, for both hosting and kicking off our session. So, Julie, we start this year with, what does inquiry mean to you?
So thank you so much for having me. And I love this topic because I really think of almost all poems as really coming from a place of inquiry, as a place of, asking questions. And I think of it as kind of all associated with wonder in a way. You're sort of wondering specific things that sort of lead you to write a poem, or but also this idea of like awe and fascination about a particular topic that leads you to to write about something, which is such a really such a commitment, and wanting to go and explore something and take the time to really look at it from all different angles. And for me, that's really what just fascinates me so much about poems, is just you have such a limited, I guess as limited as you want to make it, but it's such a short form compared to things like obviously a novel or an essay or something like that. So you really have to sort of choose your words carefully, and everything has such meaning behind it. And when John, you had first mentioned this topic, and I was thinking about these questions, and I was thinking about some of the poems that I really love that sort of first popped into my head about inquiry. I was thinking about poems like Sharon Olds wrote this really beautiful poem. I think when my parents met in May 1937, and it's all about like seeing her, like going back to the past and seeing her parents in that time and knowing what's going to become of them and how awful it's going to be, but knowing that she really needs it to happen for her to exist. And when I went back and read that poem, I was like, there's no overt question in this poem, but the whole poem is really kind of, a re-examination and a look at what would have happened if something had gone differently. And then I was thinking about Bob Hickok has these amazing heartbreaking poems about the shooting at Virginia Tech, where he teaches, and going back and reading some of those poems and really asking, throughout the poem is asking why, like, why would something like this happen? What could have been done? But it really, one, doesn't answer the question, because it doesn't feel like there's any sort of answer. And he never uses a question itself, but it just really feels like it's really exploring these topics in a way that they were just the first ones that came to mind when I thought about that. And then when I was going through my own work, I really could see inquiry in kind of almost just about everything. And so when I chose the poems for today, I really tried to sort of choose ones that looked at inquiry in different ways, to talk about that.
So, no, I think it's interesting, because I think what I hear you saying is sometimes poems don't ask a question, but they kind of open up this box where things kind of escape. And then there's others where, the questions are more specific. So, when you're, writing this kind of inquiry, screen or thinking kind of start getting blended in, or does the inquiry kind of just show up in the writing and catches you off guard?
I would say a lot of times it does catch me off guard. I have a lot of poems that I've started writing and they just veered someplace I just really didn't expect. Some of them I've actually read. Some of the ones, I guess, that are in some ways my the poems that deal most with inquiry, I've actually read for the series before. And so I chose some that were a little bit different. But one that comes to mind is I think maybe, I don't know if it was the last time or the first time that I read one about pink flannel donut pajamas.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. Kathy,
And,
you can order those online, Kathy. We're starting Wendy, we're starting a retail clothing outlet. Yeah.
And that poem ends with a question, but about my grandmother. But I honestly started writing that poem about my donut pajamas, and then it ended up being this poem about my grandmother. But I didn't know where it was going. And I feel like a lot of times for me, that is what happens. I sort of start in one place and end up in another. But one of the things that I also really love is research. And so I love diving into, honestly, probably a lot of times really unnecessary research. And a lot of it doesn't, it might inform the poem, but, most of it doesn't make it in there. But, when I was in Italy, I saw La Sagrada Familia, the great unfinished, I'm not sure if it's a basilica or a cathedral technically, but just this gorgeous creation. And so, doing tons of just reading about all of the work that went into it and all the details and all the symbolism. But then even stuff as small as I was writing a poem about birds in my backyard and then reading about sparrows and, if they migrate and all of these things. And to me, that's part of the pleasure of poetry, is just sort of looking at things from all of these different angles. And sometimes that's where I can really find sort of interesting language and metaphor, is from that's inspired by some of this, reading that I'm doing. And that's, to me, just one of the really fun things about poetry. I used to, when I was in graduate school, I actually went into graduate school for nonfiction at first, even though I had written poetry in undergrad. And I don't think I had it in me to be a memoirist. And I was kind of too introverted to really interview a lot of people about things. And so I kind of realized that maybe essay writing wasn't totally for me. And so partway through, I switched back to poetry. But I really find that a lot of what I loved and learned writing nonfiction finds its way into my poetry as well.
Nice. Yeah, we were in Rome for a couple of weeks, one for work and one with our kid, one of our daughter. And there was a book at the Airbnb we were staying all about Rome and the popes. And you're going to find this is so amazing. I think in 50 AD, the Rome metropolitan area, this is 50 AD. I mean, 50, might have been BC. I'll have to find out. Their population was 1 million. And 50 years later, it was 30,000.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then Pope Sixtus decided to build the Sistine Chapel because he just wanted his own chapel. There was never no grand, hey, Michelangelo's here, let me build a chapel. We'll get all this stuff done. It was like, I just want my own chapel so I can be by myself. Yeah. No, and I love it. I never read really about Rome and the popes, but it must have been 50 or 60 pages of stuff I read. It was just amazing. So, can you share a couple poems that you've selected with us?
Sure. So the first poem is not from the book, it's a new poem. And I, as I've mentioned on here before, so I really, I have a lot of poems about dessert. So, and I think I've read all of my dessert poems on this series before. Yep. So this is a new one. And so this is about Dum-Dums, the lollipops, which I have to say, I am not a huge fan of. I didn't know they were still around. I know. So Dum-Dums have, in some bags, there's something called the mystery flavor. And when you get it, it has all question marks on the wrapper instead of what the flavor is. And so my daughter and I had gotten these in a bag and I didn't know what, and so I looked it up, and basically they continuously run the line. And so, so if they're doing one flavor, when it melds into the other flavor, that's what is considered the mystery flavor. So it's basically, I feel like it was highly inventive on their part, because it's basically stuff they would have had to throw away anyway. So this is the poem that I wrote about it. And in the poem, I won't read it because it's kind of awkward, but after every flavor I mention, there's a little question mark in parentheses afterwards to indicate that I'm not really sure if it's that flavor.
I love it.
So, mystery flavor. I know the Dum-Dums mystery flavor is just a matter of profit and ease, that instead of shutting down the line to clean, they keep it running, so the end of butterscotch melds with the beginning of cream soda, then cream soda blends with tangerine, and then these concoctions are cooled into tiny candy heads wrapped in question marks. It's how they woo us into putting the trash of lollipops in our mouths. My daughter and I on the couch playing detective, though neither of us loves Dum-Dums beyond the satisfaction of shattering them. Their bright shards paving our molars, their dyes coating our tongues and lips as we guess, never sure of the answers or even if our mysteries are the same. And what I thought was so interesting is that you don't know. So like you don't know if it's like the mystery flavor, if you get two in a bag, if they are the same, you never know what the flavor actually is. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting ongoing mystery about that. And so part of the reason that
I gotta go check my pill container, because maybe when they did this one thing, Kathy, I don't know, I'm getting some Dexedrine in with my yeah, no, it brings up all sorts of interesting things where something just never ends, it just blends together, it all runs together. Oh boy, Jill, this is another scary, you're the queen of scary poems. This is Bus's number 2 and Mystery Dum-Dums Kathy is number yeah. Very good. Okay, a lot of humor today.
So part of the reason that we eat Dum-Dums in our house sometimes is my daughter has a nut allergy. And so there are many candies that she can't have because they're cross-contaminated with peanuts or tree nuts. And so, but when she was 2, she had a peanut reaction. The first time we gave her peanut butter. And so this poem is called Peanut, and it came out of the idea of, well, what caused this? Who's responsible for this? Why the peanut allergies are so much more common than they were, a couple of decades ago. And so what is it that's making this happen? And so in this poem, I read a lot about anaphylaxis, about peanuts and how they're grown. Hardly any of it's in this poem, but but there was a lot that kind of was just sort of like in the background. So this is called Peanut. First came the itch, then hives, her nose doubling, tongue swelling, throat blocked like a tunnel suddenly filled with water. What a long road from flower to factory to the medics rushing in with syringes, oxygen, strapping down that body I forged in mine, months sleepwalking through the universal design and all its possibilities for error. Where I find nutrients, her cells sense contagion, commence a nuclear option, a misunderstanding spiraling, where everyone is as innocent as they are guilty. One of the things I think that's one of my daughter's favorite poems, which I'm very surprised by. She's in many of my poems, but I don't know. I didn't really know if she would like that one, but she does.
What I like about all your poems is that there's a very personal connection in all the poems, whether it's, you on the bus or the dum-dums, there's always a very, which I like because it's, I feel like we're kind of having a telescope and looking in on part of your life, which is, it's nice. It's very intriguing. So.
Thank you. I really like taking kind of little ordinary moments and just kind of exploring them. I mean, some of my poems are about bigger things, but I feel like a lot of my poems are about very, very, very small things. So this next poem is called I Want to Go to Barcelona. And I wrote it, I had won this amazing fellowship that in Rhode Island, they have these fellowships for emerging writers or emerging artists. And every couple of years it switches to whether it's musicians or writers or visual artists. And so when I got this grant, I decided that I was going to go to Europe and I was going to go and look at a whole bunch of art and write about some specific art that I had been really interested in. And around that time, there started to be a lot of terrorist attacks in Europe. And it made me kind of hesitate about, or think about where I wanted to go versus other places. And then my daughter was really, I had planned my trip and I realized I was missing Mother's Day. Mother's Day was really early that year. And so that was like the second day I was going to be gone. That was the first time she was about 5. I think it was the first time I was ever going to be gone. And so she had told all her friends in like kindergarten that I was leaving, that I wasn't going to be there for Mother's Day. So I got a whole envelope of cards from all of these kindergartens saying like, I'm sorry, you're not going to be here. Ellie's going to miss you so much. I mean, it was heart-wrenching. So the inquiry behind this poem was about why I wanted to go to Barcelona and was it okay for me to feel like it was okay to go to Barcelona. So there's a couple words in here that I apologize if I don't say exactly correctly. I tried my best. So I wanted to go to Barcelona. I want to go to Barcelona as planned so I can eat tapas at La Bucaria and look at Picasso's and Moreau's and a fountain calder made of mercury before we knew mercury harmed the brain and heart. I bought my ticket after the bombings at the Stade de France, the massacre at the Bataclan. I picked Spain over France to feel safer, but that was before the airport blew in Brussels and the subway too. And yes, statistically, the risk is so minuscule. I'm more likely to drown in the tub or get hit by a bus in Providence. And yes, every day thousands die in less spectacular ways that we pass over like a jet above land. But reason isn't what I feel when seeing cheery photos of the victims than x-rays of the nails in their lungs. This fear is a beach ball I hold underwater as long as I can. Last night, my daughter played in an empty suitcase, pretended it was a plane. So I did go to Barcelona, and that's where I saw La Sagrada Familia, which I'm still writing about many years later. But it was an amazing trip. So, but it was hard to leave.
Did you go after Mother's Day or before?
I was there on Mother's Day. Yeah. So I kept my original timeline, but yes, she was okay. I talked to her, but on Mother's Day.
I thought you were going to say you had to report back to the kindergarten class about the trip or something.
Well, I had mentioned to her teacher at one point that I was going and that she might be upset. And she was like, "Oh, I know all about your trip." She was like, "I know everything that happens." So.
Oh boy. Nice. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just do this for a minute? We have a little kind of different segue this year. So, we like to have the audience, which is, Perry or Kathy, if they want to, give a comment, ask a question, that way it kind of, I can see Kathy laughing all the time. So I'm sure she's saved up some stuff or Perry. No, it's just good.
Kathy's first.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have, there's some lines I really liked, and I just thought I'd share those with you. But in the first one, putting the trash of lollipops in our mouths. I mean, if I didn't hear the poem, I would think that was the paper wrapper, but I love that it's not. And I have had those mystery lollipops and wondered about them myself, but I never was curious enough to research. I guess they didn't spark a poem for me, so because I also researched with poetry and came from nonfiction to poetry in some ways. So I find that fascinating. So I'll just ask you this question before I read a couple more lines I really liked. But sometimes when I am getting poems critiqued, I have a hard time because maybe I don't know how to cull it down enough from like this concept that's truth that really happened versus what the poem should be. And it's not that I haven't cut, I've cut a lot, but yet the first thing that people suggest to me is that I cut it down more, So do you ever have that problem? I'm just curious if that's something you run into.
Well, one of the things I run into actually is I often, so my husband, Dave O'Connell, is also a poet and read on the series a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that, so we're each other's editors, and he'll often say, like, he'll talk about something in a poem, and I was like, well, I was trying to do this, and I was trying to say this, and he'll be like, that's not here, but that's really interesting. He's like, and like, I think it's there. Like it to me, but it's so subtle that it's not coming across it all the way I intended. And so it's super helpful to me to have someone else read. I actually have the opposite problems, surprisingly, even though I do always have so much stuff that I want to put in there, but I think sometimes my ideas, like I think it's completely obvious what I'm doing. Right. And it's not, but I do find sometimes I have a hard time letting go of certain pieces of research that I think are so fascinating that really don't ultimately belong in the poem. But I thought that they were so interesting that I fight for a long time to try and keep them. And sometimes ultimately they just don't work. And it's really disappointing that I can't make it work in the structure of the poem. But yeah, so there are definitely times when, yeah, I have those things where I feel like so committed to, but they just ultimately don't belong in like the last draft. But I also I feel like even more have the opposite problem where I think something is very obvious and it's not.
Well, yeah, sometimes when I'm writing in form that's automatically short, I have that problem as well. That you know, you think you're telling, you think there's a narrative there, but the narrative is not coming through at all. Yeah.
You know what I do is I just save it for, maybe it's another poem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe, or maybe it's garbage, but sometimes it could be part of another one. Maybe that's two poems together or something. I don't know.
That's true. The last poem, "This sphere is a beach ball I hold underwater." That was an amazing contrast with you know, with what you had said right before it, I guess. That reason isn't what I fear, or no, reason wasn't what you feel, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
I really like those lines.
Thank you. Yeah, I did a lot of research on sort of statistical depth for that poem. But I do feel that anxiety probably is a big theme in my work. And that was definitely when I hit on that metaphor, it felt right how it kept bobbing up as much as I tried to hold it back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's interesting that you mentioned anxiety, because that's also like a kind of, I mean, there's a lot of questioning involved in anxiety. It's like you can't
Mhm.
stop asking questions almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Perry, any questions or comments?
Oh, I wrote down so many things here, but how often do you think, Julie, that a poem, you talked about a poem just kind of taking off? And I think that's, for me, that's the wonderful part of it. When you start out thinking you know what you want to write about, and then it just sort of goes somewhere completely. Like Leon Lee, the poet, said, it's like riding a horse. You start out and you're in control, and then all of a sudden the horse just takes off and goes somewhere that you can't control. I like that. But it doesn't happen often to me. It's more work to me. But every once in a while, you write that one poem that just comes out of, I don't know where the hell it comes out of. It just flies out. Has that happened to you often, would you say?
I would say not a whole poem sort of coming. I find that I often start poems in one place and they end up in another. And I'm a pretty slow writer, so I feel like it's often feels like a, definitely sort of a long process. And I do a lot of revision, and so I feel like in that process I figure out where I'm going. But I'm always amazed by people when sort of like poems show up wholesale, because that really hardly ever happens to me.
It doesn't happen much,
But I love Lee Young Lee. He's such an
Oh
amazing
God,
writer.
he's so good. He's supposed to have a new book, but I haven't seen it yet.
Mhm.
It's supposed to be out soon.
Hey,
I had
Perry,
the
put his name in the chat, will you?
Okay.
Yeah, I had the chance to
I
meet him.
always like, actually, he was here and I met him once years ago. And he's
Yeah,
the
I
nicest
met him.
guy and very humble.
Yes.
And
Yes,
yeah.
I know. He was,
Yeah.
I met him when I was in undergrad. We had dinner with him and he asked us so many questions about our work. And I was like, you are such an unbelievable, he was so humble. He was such a nice person.
But real quickly, speaking of other poets, revision and cutting things down, you talked about. The very first writing conference I ever went to was with Carl Dennis. You know, Carl lives here in Buffalo. He won the Pulitzer. He's an amazing poet. So he said, bring your, your best stuff. So I brought this, I brought these couple poems, and it was about that long. And by the time I walked out of there, he had cut it down to like that. And
It's a one sentence
I
poem.
remember his words were, "That's what's salvageable," he told me. And and I went home and I was real depressed and pissed off, and I'm never doing this again. And then I realized, he was right. He was absolutely. The rest was blabbing. It was just blabbing. But anyway, I do enjoy your work so much, and your husband's too. I was here for your husband's reading too.
Oh,
weeks
thank
ago.
you. Yeah, he's so talented. I've learned so much.
Really good, really good.
Yeah, Julie, I wrote a bunch of notes. David did say something that I found really intriguing. He said, it's how our stories are having arguments. And I found, that to be contradictory, but actually kind of calming, that our stories are kind of, having this little boxing match back and forth until something sorts itself out. Now, I just thought it was, we couldn't keep him quiet. I think that was the problem. He could, no, I'm kidding. He was great. He was great to have on the show. So do you want to read some more poems for us?
Sure, that would be great. So this next poem it's a museum poem, but it's not an art poem. But when I went to Ohio State for grad school, when my parents came to, and that's in Columbus, and my parents came to visit me, they figured it was the only time they were ever going to be in Ohio, and they really wanted to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is in Cleveland and is about 2.5 hours from Columbus. And so we made the drive. I did not really want to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but my parents really wanted to go. So we went, and we saw, when we were there is sort of an exhibit in glass all by itself. And it was John Lennon's clothes from the night that he died. And they were in a paper bag, and his glasses were separate from the bag, but in the same case. And there was a note from Yoko Ono on there saying that she had donated these clothes to the museum as a way of protesting gun violence and raising awareness about gun violence. And so I was thinking about that in terms of inquiry, and it was very clear why, there was no question why she had made this donation. And for me, the question in the poem was kind of how it made me reflect on my relationship with my parents, who I grew up, I did not appreciate their great taste in music at the time, but they had, they were big fans of the Beatles and John Lennon and Jimi Hendrix and all of these people that we, whose artifacts and things we saw that day at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so, and how that had kind of shaped all of our lives. And so, so this is called On Seeing the Bag of John Lennon's Bloody Clothes, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Cleveland. They were in a glass case in a crumpled paper bag wrapped in duct tape and plastic next to a photograph of his blood-flecked glasses. When Lennon was shot, I was 6, up late with the flu, and my father heard it from Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football. He didn't cry or yell, just lowered his head like my grandfather saying grace, and asked me to get my mother from the shower. Today, when we arrived, after hours speeding down I-80, my parents posed in front of the glass pyramids like teens on a honeymoon. They led me to Janice's scarf and her 65 Porsche, to Morrison's Cub Scout shirt, then let me slip away by the stones. That's when I saw his clothes and Yoko's note about wanting to be shocking. For a moment, I was rooted. Had she ever dared open the bag, or had those clothes stayed dark and heaped for decades, made of tougher stuff than the body they'd been cut off? Somehow it was more of a grave than a grave. And when my parents came walking toward me, I steered them away, as if they hadn't seen more than me, hadn't waited all my life for me to loosen the strings, even if it wasn't dropping acid at the Paradise or yelling slogans at cops in the park. But I've always been more doo-wop than rock, the colonial to their tenement. After Lennon died, there were nights my father would turn on the stereo and sit on the couch in his work clothes, still dusty from ripping up carpets. As the music played, he'd look so distant that I'd just watch him listen, until he asked me to lift the needle from the record, a moon I'd guide back to orbit, then hold on to with both hands.
Wow.
Thanks.
When were your parents born? They must have been born around what? Between 1945 and 1950 or something?
Yeah, my dad was born in 1950 and my mom was born in 53.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix, man. He was, and there's so many great people that died really early. And no, very powerful. No, I would have never expected. And I thought the Rock and Roll Wall of Fame was like, platinum record things and,
Yeah, I know.
a ticket stub and stuff. I didn't realize it was like bloody clothes and Cub Scout shirts.
So
Wow.
that was the only thing like that was there that I saw. I mean, granted, this was in 2002, but so I'm not sure if it's still there, but yeah, it was pretty powerful and unexpected.
Yeah. No, nice. Nice. Thank you for sharing.
Julie,
So-
so in the poem, you said that you steered them away. So did they not see it? Were you the only one that saw it?
Yeah, I don't think that they did see it. No, although, but I mean, they've since read the poem.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they didn't see it that day. They were so happy to be there.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
this next poem is also about my dad, and about so this is kind of, I feel like, a little bit, maybe I would call it a reverse inquiry. I don't know. But so this is basically, as the narrator of the poem, I'm kind of looking back on the past, sort of knowing what happens to my dad and his friends, like in the Vietnam era, but them not knowing. So this is called Father 1970. Outside sipping dip donuts, he and Drag and Crazy Andy down Cuervo until their blood runs gold, until Charlie leases by, back enough from yesterday's bad acid to do his Tony Bennett for the troops. He smooths his storm cloud curls, his torn doors t-shirt, even sways as he butchers, put on a happy face to booze, a beer can clocked at his head. They drink more. Crazy Andy seduces 24 jellies from the counter girl, and they eat until they're powdered white. Nights, those boys are still there. That lot's so hot, they sweat standing still. Not one complains. 3 are heading over, and my father's number is coming quick. I know who will die, who will live. I'd never tell. They're all practicing, and they've got to be ready when it comes.
Yeah. You don't hear too many poems lately about the Vietnam War. So, no.
Yeah, my dad was actually, we just went to a 70th birthday party for my aunt, and he was talking about, he was granted a conscientious objector at the time, and was saying like how rare and lucky that had been. So, but yeah, it was something he used to talk about a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
And I have one more father poem. It's not about my father, but it's about I feel like I have a lot of poems, which kind of goes back to the anxiety theme, about the idea of not being able to rehearse for bad things happening, but yet, you know, how we still do it. And this poem I kind of thought of as something about a failure of inquiry, like being unable to imagine how someone else feels when it hasn't happened to you. And this is called When the First Father Dies. When the first father dies, you're glad it's not your own. Down the row, you say, so sorry, so sorry. And usually for the first, you are the sorriest. For somehow he's deader at 50 or 55 than fathers picked over by time. He dropped clean, his heart in the yard, or cancer swum wide and quiet. We know this waits, rooms tamed by wing chairs, their feet dug in plush. And once that door is ajar, you'll be through again, kissing cheek after cheek, getting down the rhythm of grief. Father before daughter, mother after father before daughter, if no one misses their cue. But no matter the soft comforts you utter or the number of bodies you hold, your turn will not be better. Seeing a mugging isn't being mugged. Holding your breath isn't a pillow held over your face.
Woo. Oh boy, I'm on the bus ride again.
Yeah, so I would say that is probably my darkest poem besides the bus poem. So.
Kathy, don't ride on a bus in Providence. I think that's the message on that other poem we're talking about. Because no, listen. No, I wrote down rehearsing bad things happening. No, just it brings up all sorts of ideas, feelings, remembrances. Yeah. No, very nice, very nice. I want to have, Kathy and Perry chime in again, because we were going to enter the last 15 minutes of the Twilight Zone. So, Kathy, Perry, any questions, comments?
Well, I'll just say how deeply that poem moved me. That whole concept of an expectation of order, an expectation of, how long somebody's going to live. And my dad died fairly early, but more so was in a hospital bed for 10 years. So we lost most of him, much earlier. Then I lost my daughter in a car accident at 26. So when you read that poem, it really hits me deeply, but I appreciate it because
Thank
it
you.
kind of it also gives order to those feelings. So thank you. And then I wondered, I know the first poem you read was new, but the others, are they from different books or one book, or?
They're all from my first book, Those Who Keep Arriving. I have a chapbook too, but this is like my first full-length book. So they're all from that one. I'm so
Great.
sorry about your daughter.
Thank you. We just have to move along and try to do our best. Carrie, you're next.
Next, what was I going to ask here? God, I've got so many things written down here. Sharon Olds poem, peanut allergies. Yeah, because my daughter has that too. I escaped the pandemic for a few days and went to New York, and I stood across from the Dakota and composed a poem. But some wonderful work there. Those last couple poems just blew me away. Really pretty amazing. Really, really nice.
Yeah, and about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame poem, I could have been with my husband. We'd have been your parents. In terms of our, the music that we grew up with. And that would have been a hard exhibit to see too.
Mm. Well, my very first rock concert was I was 16. I saw Jimi Hendrix. Very first.
Oh, wow.
And that blew me away. That changed everything.
Yeah,
My
I
dad
never
used to-
saw him.
you-
Yeah, I never saw him live. I went to Woodstock, but I left before.
Did
After
you?
3 days of mud and rain and not having any money in my pocket, I decided, Julie, time to pack the tent up and head home. Yeah, that was brutal. No, but it was no, you're right. Just some brilliant people, or just anybody that dies early. And I read the Times, the Boston Globe, a bunch of newspapers, and I read, I look at the obits, and life is just too short. And you're right. And when there's a known personality, like this guy died, I think a couple of days ago, Bob, who was on Sesame Street for 47 years.
Mm.
And there was a whole story. I was on the ABC Nightly News. No, he's a very famous guy. Someone stopped him in a grocery store. Some kid stopped him in a grocery store and took his hand. And Bob thought it was like, it's like the kid was talking about Sesame Street. Like Bob, when you were on the, yeah. No, just people, hey, people are memorable. When they leave, it's, yeah, challenge.
Julie,
challenge me.
what book does that poem that I mentioned appear in, about the perfection?
Oh,
Is that in this one?
yeah. Those who keep arriving. Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to get that.
Thank you.
My poem that I wrote inspired by that, it will be in, I have a book this year coming out, well, who knows when, but in Finishing Line Press. So I'll have to send you a copy of it.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, I'd absolutely love that.
So Kathy, just look in the email. I wanted you to make sure I had your email address. I think I do, but I'm not sure. And then, Julie, just before we leave, put the name of the book in the chat if you could.
Okay.
And so then if you have a few more to close out with, if you wanted to torture Kathy and read the bus one, so Kathy's hair can turn a different color than it is now.
I can handle it.
You can handle it. I don't know.
I'll read the bus one. I'll read the bus one next, and then we'll get that
Yeah.
one. It was funny. So Elizabeth Sylvia, who's going to be reading with the series in a couple weeks, she has a podcast, and she had actually contacted me about the bus poem, which and she did a podcast on it, which was so cool. But I was telling her when we were talking about it, I was like, I hardly ever read that poem because it's so dark. Like, and I don't want to kind of like shut things down. So this is called Distance. You can fawn over cancer in a smoker if you've never taken a drag. You can feel sorrier when the woman was mugged late at night. And when a child drowns, you know you would have latched that fence, listened for footsteps by the door. It's said that tragedy draws us closer, yet we look for a rock to wedge between us and horror. Today, on the bus route I take to work, a man stabbed a woman until she died. It was early afternoon. I heard it first on the news and later at our stop, how quickly talk leapt from shock to sympathy to, did she know him? Randomness is the mad king of fear. No one can prepare for the man who pulls a knife before she even looks up. The reporter had said once it was over, 3 men held him until the cops came. Tonight, we waited in wool and fleece, in down and leather, in a tight circle of streetlight. Did any of us wake today and think we'd be dead by day's end? Maybe she did. After all, it was her husband, which made us feel better. It's always safer when someone is killed by someone they loved.
Incredible.
So that my very dark last poem.
Wow.
Yeah, it's evocative. It's just like, wow. Woo.
I feel like I need to end on like an up on.
Yeah, that's
So
hey,
this
we'll
is
have
kind of
balloons go off. We'll have all sorts of.
so this is kind of up. I guess it gets a little dark at the end, I guess, but this is called The Night Before Kindergarten, and this is one of those very ordinary moment poems where, you know, I feel like kindergarten is a big deal when they go, but it happens to everybody. And so this poem, the telescope that is referenced in this poem is actually in the dining room with me because it's so big that we keep it as like a piece in our dining room. So this is called The Night Before Kindergarten. This year, late summer is the time to see Saturn. So my husband drags the 5-foot telescope in the backyard, fiddles with lenses and charts as our daughter does somersaults in the dark, gleeful to be up past 8. I shiver in a t-shirt and shorts as she lowers her face to the eyepiece, taking in this planet orbited by dust and rocks of ice, some large as a school bus, while my husband explains the rings could be from a dead moon or what was left over when Saturn was born. She is impressed, but not as impressed as us the first time we saw it, when she was weeks old and we were grateful to be outside where we couldn't hear her wail, our world grown airless as a closed jewelry box. To her, the extraordinary is still ordinary. So why not planet shuttled to the eye by a tube tall as a sister? We've shut every light in the house to keep the night clean, to let her see the show that's all for her, the girl we made and circled until she knew she was the sun. Tomorrow we'll send her off to unlearn it, to discover, as we did, how small we are, how little we matter anywhere but here.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice. Julie, thank you again. Just, I feel like was I invited to your Thanksgiving? I didn't know if I got the invitation. I feel like Kathy, I feel like I just had dessert. Now I'm no, listen, very, very special. And I just feel very grounded. I feel kind of uncertain though. Some of your poems have this like there's like a little agitation now going on in my system, and that Alka-Seltzer is not going to work on. No, it's great. It really is. No, listen, when poems move you and move you to think or experience something, it's just, to me that's why I do it. It is like just amazing. It's like energy. It's like air. Just makes it all work.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I always have so much fun reading for this series.
Oh no, it's great. It's great. All right. I think we will sign off. Julie, I know we'll be in touch. And thank David again for his he was like, I wrote down so many things. I feel like he just rattled off stuff for like half an hour before we had him stop. Okay, David, we got a timeout on the field.
I missed that one. I'm going to have to watch the recording.
No, he was good.
Good.
Good
That
stuff.
was good. Thank you, Julie, for sharing.
Julie, thank you. And Wendy,
Good to
thank you
see you
again
all.
for hosting. Yep.
See you soon.
Yep. We'll see everybody next week. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.